Hello everyone, what's going on? We're here with a control video. I'm joined by Liam Haliburton, who recently got top 16 at the San Antonio Regional Championships. I thought his deck was really cool, and I'm super excited for him to tell me all about it. I know a little bit about control, but not a lot, so I'm kind of learning along with you guys. Liam, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so the majority of my time playing Pokemon has been spent in the juniors and seniors division. I won seniors worlds in 2022. My time in masters, I top aided in Arlington, and I recently top 16 in San Antonio. So not very many finishes, but Texas has been good to me.
Nice. Yeah. And so I see you online a lot. You're playing weird decks. I saw your Shadow Rider Calyrex deck that you played at Worlds. Actually, that's crazy to me. Is there what's the wildest deck you've ever played?
Wildest deck?
Mm-hmm.
I'd say my favorite deck is Banette.
Banette.
Um, yeah, I still put in time with that every single format
Oh my
since it was
gosh,
released. It's definitely one of my favorites.
that's super
Uh,
cool. So why do you always come up with these interesting decks? We'll say.
um, I I try to gain like what I see as a substantial advantage. Maybe I'm giving like too much credit to my opponents, but I try to go into an event expecting perfect play from my opponents. I don't want to count on mistakes. That's what
Yeah.
I say. And so in doing that, I think going into an event with like a 50-50 matchup spread, that sounds terrifying. I'm going to go 5-4.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I have to search for a deck that's going to give me some 100 zeros. And in doing that, I try to make something really cool. But usually it's more like zero hundreds. I just try to convince myself otherwise.
But this time it worked with your control deck. So how did you come up with this deck? Were you working with your friends? Was it a last minute decision? How did it come
I
together?
net decked the list off of Alessandro Carmascoli, who had played it to a few regionals in Europe. I had some solid finishes. I think top 32, top 64.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that guy's really good. So
Okay.
got it
So
right from
then
him.
I suppose Hale, he made the top eight. They must have also been net decking from them, presumably.
I think Hale put in more time with the deck because there were quite a few changes.
Okay.
Hale cut all the Poke Gears for some like kind of weird techs, playing a Dunsparce, Defiance Vest, and thing Cheryl over Turo, which I think is a great addition. That's the one that I would like immediately make.
Okay, so that people can't kill your Pidgeot.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Um, so then why would you play this kind of deck over like the typical block lax deck? I mean, we saw Cal Connor make the top eight as well. What is like the upside of this Pidgeot Luxray stuff you got going on?
Yeah, the big advantage is Luxray. I think one thing that will really help people understand it is that this deck is not really a Snorlax deck. It's more of a Luxray deck. So you're actually like the primary game plan is to like actively discard your opponent's resources. I think when you compare that to like the Snorlax deck that Cal played, the plan is just to put up Snorlax and like see how many switch effects your opponent has. If they have enough switch effects to take six prizes, well, then they got you. Whereas this one, they could have like 16 switch effects. I actually played a deck that had 12. I played against Entei Valiant, but I threw up the Luxray, and you're able to like actively discard their switch effects, and it's more of like a wall deck in that you throw up this like 260 HP monster, where if they're not able to deal with it and like efficiently KO it, you just discard all of their resources until you win the game.
Okay, cool. So then the Luxray is, I mean, I had the pleasure of playing Luxray in Peoria in my Mew DT grabber deck, and it was really the disruption piece that made it so strong. I was able to just make my opponent's dead draw, really. Is that aspect ever effective in this deck, or is it more so grabbing switch cards and bosses?
Yeah, the disruption aspect is definitely like present in this deck, but not to the same extent because you're not able to push for like switch cards on like turn one as easily. You're not playing judges or anything. But when the opportunity presents itself and I open Stormy Mountain DTE Penny, I
You do it.
sometimes will go for it. You have to make sure that your setup is okay because when you're Luxraying, you're not able to Rotom, so like you
That's
lose
true.
a really big portion of your draw. But like if your hand is okay and you don't need to Rotom, I definitely will push for that early Luxray.
Okay. So have you ever thought of including like a judge or more Ionos in your deck to lean into that aspect, or that's not what the deck's about?
I mm, I don't think so. Like I think the deck's matchups are already like super duper good as long as you hit turn two Pidgeot.
Hmm.
So just building completely for turn two Pidgeot, which is leaning more towards Arven, is the direction that I take the deck.
All right. So speaking of those really good matchups, I mean, we can jump right into what I think is the best matchup, Charizard. Is there anything these Charizard players can do to take you out? What are you worried about them doing?
Yeah. Pool Jammer, Lost City, and Heat Tackle Charmander are the three cards that make this matchup kind of tricky as long as they open Charmander or Pidgey. If they open, like Mew or Manaphy or something, it's pretty much over. That is like a pretty terrible starter. Even if you play Turo, it's a really long process to Turo safely where I can't just Erika's it right back. Um, and so as long as you open those, you're able to create a board that is pretty tricky for Snorlax players. What Snorlax players want to do is you have to have a Charmander on the bench because if you don't, I throw up the Mimikyu and force you to bench a Charmander eventually. So once you have a Charmander on the bench, I boss it with the Snorlax, and I basically just make you attach energy until you run out of energy. You set up that Zard, and then once you have all Zards in play, I throw up the Mimikyu, you bench another Charmander, you have to make that a Zard, and then you run out of energy. Now, what Zard players can do is if they're playing the Heat Tackle Charmander, they're able to start self-KOing the Charmander that I boss. And this self-KO is like really quite a threat because first of all, it does 30 damage to the Snorlax. So you're creating like some long-term threat of knocking out the Snorlax, which is like after 5 hits, you're going to take a knockout. So I have to weave in a penny every 4 turns, right?
Yep.
The other is that you're threatening to self-KO, and this self-KO is like pretty scary because even after the first self-KO, I basically lose my Luxray option forever, provided that you play the Tool Jammer. The Tool Jammer will turn off the Bravery Charm, and I have no way to deal with it because I'm not playing Lost Vacuum. So you basically just throw it on the Zard, and it permanently is KOing everything that has Bravery Charm on it, as long as like the raw damage output's enough, which it is for Snorlax and Luxray after you give the first prize. Okay. The other thing is, I guess like you instantly go into this lock, so after they give the first prize, your counter catchers turn off as well. So it can be like really quite a scary position. And the long-term threat is obviously to give up even more prizes and then reach a point where you can boss KO Pidgeot. So I have to like figure out something by then, and that's usually just an Erika's and praying I hit it, which is honestly quite scary because with Pidgeot you can search for Iono and Lost Vacuum whenever you want. And while those resources are limited, it feels quite scary to play against.
Yeah, You got to fight through, what is it, 3 Ionos and 2 vacuums, so 5 outs to get, and then the vacuums get rid of them forever too, which is really bad, right?
Yeah,
exactly. So when those Charmanders self KO, do you then pick up your Snorlax and go into Mimikyu, so they have to bench another Charmander?
Yeah. That's definitely the best play. I recall echoing horning a Charmander. Seems quite poor when I think of it.
Oh yeah,
I should have definitely gone to Mimikyu.
Go into Mimikyu, make them bench a new one. Yeah, and then they don't get to keep the Heat Tackle Charmander.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely the move. Absolutely the move.
Is I believe the Charmeleon also self KOs, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So is that
the thing? Is, the Charmeleon like basically never appears, or it shouldn't appear, because as long as they have the Lost City, if the Charmeleon appears, you like instantly Snorlax it. So they have to evolve it into a Zard, or I mean they can lose it with the self KO eventually. Mm-hmm. But like you basically spend that whole time hunting for their Super Rod with the sisters while they're trying to self KO with the Charmeleon.
Yeah.
And then if you hit the Super Rod or they evolve it, the game's basically over because you just throw up the Mimikyu and they don't have like a real attacker to deal with it.
I guess you could.
However,
you go.
Yeah.
I was gonna say you could also put a DT on your Pidgeot and then you play a Lost City and you can Lost Zone their Charmeleon. Yeah.
That is a move as well.
Yeah, that's cool.
You can absolutely go for. The Pidgeot's like a really solid attacking threat to have. It's not like amazing, but it's nice to know that you can like somewhat deal with a threat if you have to.
Mm-hmm. Especially for some of these decks that have minimal answers to Mimikyu, sometimes that Pidgeot can just take it out.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So another good matchup, Urshifu. Is there anything an Urshifu player can do?
Not really. No. They just have to try to trigger you down quick with Inteleon and Urshifu to hit a quick rapid flow. That attack's really solid. But yeah, once the Mimikyu comes active, the Octillery basically has to come active to make progress, and then you penny up the Mimikyu, throw the Snorlax active, and they have like one switch effect.
Yeah, and Octillery does 50 a turn. That's pretty bad. They don't have, doesn't do 50 and 10 to itself, so it can't self KO. So just no chance there. No cool plays. Okay. And then let's talk maybe about an interesting matchup, the Miraidon matchup. I think this matchup's fairly close. How do these games go down?
Um, the general board that I try to play for is Rotom Bravery Charm, Mimikyu Bravery Charm on the bench, and then the rest Snorlaxes. You can't go for the Pidgeot because Boss KO is just like way too efficient for them.
Hmm.
Yeah, just every boss turns into two prizes basically if you bench the Pidgeot. I don't think Dunsparce is worth it to try and fix that because if they bench the hands and power that up, then Boss KO still turns into two prizes. So I don't think it really fixes the issue. While it does like boost your consistency a little bit, it's only like a slight bump and doesn't really fix the issue. Um, so yeah, I don't think Dunsparce is worth it. But yeah, you can't bench Pidgeot in the matchup. But what you can do is, yeah, they usually bench Flaffy to try and go really quickly. Or even if they try to go like slowly and try to slow roll you with the Zapdos and the Miraidon, you can usually try to Erica's down a target, and at that point, it's their four switches. It's their four switches against your counter catchers, and like without the Pidgeot, your search can get kind of sus, especially with their Ionos and stuff like that. So like whether or not you're able to hit the switches at the right time is really all the matchup comes down to. Or like hit the counter catchers if they can hit the switches. If the sisters hits counter catchers or hits switches,
Switches, yeah.
is what comes down to.
Yeah. So then in this matchup, is a Spiritomb like backbreaking for you because you don't have the Pidgeot? You probably rely on Rotom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Spiritomb really bad for that.
Okay.
Like Spiritomb in general is bad for the deck. Even in like Pidgeot based matchups, like you just go for a turn one and like the engine just turns off. So
Yeah. Sometimes you
because
can't even get the
Rotom is
Pidgeot.
like the intermediate step to hitting the Pidgeot.
Okay. Okay. And then another matchup that I thought was close. You've actually told me this is not close, but tell me about the Mew matchup. How does this one go?
Yeah, the Mew matchup's basically finished as soon as you get a Pidgeot up because you're able to hit the combo of Luxray, Spiritomb, Iono, and Countercatcher Genesect. And then as well as hit like choice supporters every turn, which is like Sydney, Giacomo, and Sisters. And what this combo does is it basically sets your opponent to a low hand size, gets rid of like their most useful cards, to the point where like usually they just have nothing in their hand, and then strands their active and then prevents them from drawing. So they're basically down to drawing one card a turn, and that card like isn't enough on its own because the combo that they have to hit to knock out Luxray Bravery Charm is Switch, DTE, Power Tablet, Vacuum.
Yep.
It's four cards. They never draw it, so they draw it in like pieces, and
And then you
you
rip
just
them
discard
out.
those pieces as they draw.
Yeah, okay, that's super cool. They would literally have to top deck Judge into the perfect four cards.
Yeah, exactly.
That's super cool. That reminds me, did you play those old Zoroark handlock decks with like Mars and Reset Stamp Surge, all that? Oh my gosh, I miss those decks. I miss those decks. Um,
Oranger was really quite a fun card to
yeah,
play
a
with.
Rangaroo. That was really the lifeline of those decks.
Yeah.
All right, what have we not talked about? The Guardy matchup. How does the Guardy matchup go?
I think that matchup's solidly favored if they don't have Turo,
Okay.
and like slightly unfavored and maybe like fully unfavored. I haven't really tested it enough to know if they do have Turo. The way the matchup usually goes is you Snorlax Bravery Charm and you boss the Guardy EX. They can only hit you for 190, so they're not taking a knockout. Sometimes they do take a knockout because they have the vacuum, but then you throw up another Snorlax Bravery Charm or whatever, and that one's not going to get knocked out. But the point is, once they burn those 3 energy, they're not taking a knockout. You can boss something else, and then basically repeat the process. The other option that they have is throwing 5 energy on, even or whether it's a Zacian or a Shining Arcana, and that takes a knockout. But then they're down 5 energy. So if they're already down 3 energy from the EX, they're down 5 energy from the the attacker they just used. You can counter catch or something else, and they're like basically completely out. There's some counterplay in boss or Pidgeot or Rotom, which lets them retreat, and Collapse Stadium, which lets them discard all of their energies. But I mean, you basically just rinse and repeat this process of bossing stuff without energy until they run out. They usually do have to full bench because to play around Erica's,
Yep.
and because you're able to like create, or because their draw engine slows down way too much if they try to play a low bench. And you're able to like put it on enough pressure with Luxray that you'll eventually be able to like find a target before they're able to make progress.
Okay, okay. So do you use Luxray in this matchup then? Do you lead with a Luxray or?
you lead with the Luxray if you can, but your setup is really, really quite important in that matchup, especially because if they're able to like Mirage that, and then you have the Luxray in the active and you haven't evolved Pidgey yet, they're able to go like Guardy EX, Retreat, Screamtail, KO Pidgey, and then you're like permanently your setup is like permanently lacking. So you really have to prioritize your setup, but if you're still able to get Luxray out before they're attacking and you're all set up, it's definitely amazing. If you're able to hit the Turo or boss or collapse early on, it makes your chances of winning skyrocket.
Yeah, that is true. Okay. And then Lost Tina. Is that an auto loss? Is there anything you can do? Does Luxray save you somehow, or
It makes the matchup a little bit better.
a little
I think it
better?
goes from like 0-100 to like 20-80.
Oh, nice.
If they open really slow, you're able to discard a ton of resources. You might be able to like stick them with an Iono endgame. If they have like some poor flower select things, if you rip a Sydney for 2 jet, like
Yeah.
there's a few like winning scenarios where you can get pretty close. But yeah, the matchup is really quite hard. They have so many switch effects, and like the issue is even though the Luxray is really quite strong, anytime you have it active, Lost Impact is like efficient enough for them where like even though they lose the 2 energy, the 2 prizes are easily worth it. So
Yeah.
it's hard to make progress without giving them like efficient routes off of just like top decking Jet.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. And there's no way to pressure the jet energies in their deck. Those always
Yeah,
are.
exactly.
And then
That's
eventually they draw them. That's a switch. You can't prevent that even with the Luxray.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Is there any matchups I missed that you played against you thought were interesting or anything at all matchup wise?
I don't think so.
No. Okay. Cool. Then my next question for you is how you play these control decks in best of 3 50-minute environments in these regionals.
I think yeah, timing is definitely like a massive issue for like really slow decks. I found it was like you're usually able to win 1-0, but the issue is your opponent's able to time their scoop on the first game to where they have enough time to win game 2, but there's like no world you ever finish 3 games because like the deck is just so slow. Mm-hmm. So like you basically have to win 2-0 every single time because you have to slow them down enough. Sometimes if your opponent like messes up their scoop and scoops a little bit late, you're able to buy time with the Pidgeot, where you can go like counter catch Iono and they draw pass for 3 turns and like
you make it back.
You're able to time them out that way, but it's usually you have to win like 2-0.
Okay, so then you take your time, you focus on the first game, and then you just hope that your setup's good enough to not get donked in the second game, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of your matchups are like insanely favored, so I guess that's the logic, is they're just so favored you'll win 2 games.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the matchups are super polarized.
Yeah. So then moving forward, were there any changes you would make to your list? I mean, we saw Hale's list as well, had a couple differences. And would you recommend this deck moving forwards?
I definitely play the Cheryl over the Turo. It makes the Zard matchup a lot better. That was actually one of the stressors in the Zard matchup, which was like boss hit Pidgeot. If you Turo, you like lose your Pidgeot into Iono. Mm-hmm. And pre-benching Pidgey is also kind of scary because it's just like it's like a free boss prize for them. So like, yeah, Turo is like a pretty bad heal card. I want to say like it definitely makes it like a little bit better because sometimes you can catch like Guardy players where you like Turo the Pidgeot and like their last out was boss. But I generally think that Cheryl is just like the more solid card for the deck. I also want to fit in a 4th Pokegear. That card's like really good. Like the whole deck is basically built around turn 1, turn 2 Arven. You hit that, you hit turn 2 Pidgeot, and like you're off to the races. But so maxing that out seems good to me. Not sure exactly what I cut, but yeah.
Okay. What about an Avery? That's the other thing that I thought was missing.
Yeah, I think Avery's good if you don't want to like lose to some like cheesy setups, I guess. Like Guardy Turo can go for a weird setup where they get 4 routes because they Turo up the Mirage Step Curlia, a Guardy EX or like a Guardy EX and an Arcana, and then they have 3 energy on the EX and the Arcana and 4 energy on the routes, which are all teleportation burst, and like you just can't beat that setup. But like, you know, if they go for that setup, they basically like they let you Luxray as much as you want. So like they're basically just folding to an Avery or something. So they really have to be quite confident to go for that. So I'm not sure I'd play the Avery. It's just to like, you know, actually make good on the threat.
Yeah, yes, but yeah, often the threat is probably enough. If I was playing Gardevoir, I probably wouldn't go for that. I'd probably just try to play a normal game.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, exactly. And that have the Turo as like some extra firepower, right?
yeah, exactly at the end. Okay, cool. And then would you recommend this deck moving forward? Do you think well, obviously you thought it was a good meta call for this tournament. If the Charizard play rate drops off, do you think it's still a good deck, or do you think that's really what it needs to take over a tournament?
Um, I'd say I'm pretty confident in like all of the other matchups as well. Like they're not necessarily good, but they're definitely at a place where you can be comfortable with. The main issue is Lost Zone Teen. I think Lost Zone Teen is an excellent play going forward. I'm sure a lot of people are feeling that as well. So, I think Lost Zone Tina play is going to be really quite high, especially among top players. So I'd be pretty scared of taking it to an event. But
Okay, cool.
it's definitely like a solid play if you want to make the meta call.
Well, thanks for coming on and teaching me about this control deck. Do you have any final thoughts, any shout outs you want to give, anything like that before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I guess shout out to the people who originally made the deck. I've talked with them a little bit. They understand the deck much better than I do. So if you have questions, you should definitely ask them as well. Vinny Fernandez and Alessandro Cromscoli are the two people that I know who are involved in the deck. I Caterpie on Twitter, and I think it's just Vinny Fernandez on
Okay,
Twitter as
cool.
well.
All right, well, thanks for coming on, Liam.
Yeah, absolutely. Pleasure.